Capital tonight.
My next guest is a member of the new pro-hydrofracking coalition. It's called Clean Growth Now. And also, he is the CEO of the New York State Associated General Contractors. He is Mike Elmendorf. He's a friend of the show. Nice to see you.
Thank you, Liz. Good to be back.
It is good to have you. Why do you guys need this? Everybody knows that business is pro-fracking. The IOGA's not enough. We need you too.
Well, I think, frankly, the discourse needs it. There's been a lot of noise on, well, maybe the noise has been more on one side of the issue than the other side.
Yes. But
really what you've had is obviously you've had the industry out there advocating for this and some business groups, but not really in a particularly coordinated fashion in many cases. And then on the other side, you've had, that's kind of maybe where the noise has been. Certainly you've got some folks that have legitimate concerns, and we did too at the onset here in terms of how we looked at this. But then you've got some things that border on, near hysteria. You've got the guy from a movie that you saw, and you can't remember his name, but he's an expert, so he's talking about it.
Gasland?
You've got, no, I'm talking about the actor who's been very involved in this, that guy.
Okay.
Does anyone really remember his name? Maybe not. You've got state legislators that are holding hearings on this, that they actually stop in the middle of the hearing so that the Gasland guy can reload his film so that he doesn't miss any of the hearing. These things are not really contributing to a serious discourse here, and this is a serious issue. Yeah. And it's one that we've got to get right, and I think, that's what we're trying to add to the conversation.
Yeah, I think it's the got to get right part that scares people the most, because you can't undo polluted water that people can no longer drink. You can't undo I'm not saying this is going to happen, I'm just saying that the potential for something going wrong makes people so nervous. It's not like, oh, there'll be a little something or another that will ameliorate. It's big. It's a big deal.
Sure. Well, a couple of things. First, from our perspective, from AGC's perspective, our members took a real serious look at this, and they were very clear. They did not want to be out there advocating for this for that very reason if they weren't convinced that it couldn't be done
safely and responsibly. Well, how do you go about that? Do you have a meeting with your members, and
Sure.
and then
they we not only had a meeting with our members, we had representatives from the environmental community come in, folks from the industry come in, former DEC officials who had expertise on this come in, and we had a very frank, open, objective discussion about it, and unanimously our members voted to support it. And keep this in mind, from the perspective of our industry, these are folks who are used to rigorous engineering standards. They're very used to being regulated. They deal with environmental regulation. They build not only the transportation infrastructure, the building infrastructure, the environmental infrastructure around the state, all of which will loom large in this if it goes forward.
Yeah, they stand to gain from this.
Well, they stand to gain from it, but they also understand how these things work. I mean, I think everybody stands to gain from it. If you look at the potential economic upside here, particularly in the areas of the state where this would happen, there are areas of the state that have struggled mightily economically and don't have a lot of big other opportunities waiting around the corner.
Did you guys, because you're approaching this from a business perspective, did you crunch the numbers regarding the projected very high economic benefit that the DEC has put forward, and did you determine that it was in fact correct? Because there has been talk from the other side, from the people who are opponents, that a lot of that benefit is actually going to go to people who come in, jobs particularly, from other states who are skilled, and then they leave. I mean, not all of these jobs are going to go to local people, and also it's sort of a short-term thing. They will drill, and then they will not at the end of it.
Well, there's been a lot of numbers out there. We think the DEC numbers may actually be fairly conservative, which is not to say they're downplaying it, but you can crunch numbers, or what you can actually do is get in the car and go down to the southern tier and look at Pennsylvania. The impact in Pennsylvania.
I think people have looked at Pennsylvania and they're terrified about what they see in Pennsylvania.
Well, it's funny because the people of Pennsylvania aren't terrified. In recent public opinion polls, they overwhelmingly support the gas drilling, which has been going on there for several years. You don't have people's sinks exploding in flames. You don't have people's drinking water being poisoned. And I think it's very clear that if it will only happen in New York, and the governor, I think, has plotted the right course. He's doing it very deliberately. The DEC and Commissioner Martens are doing this deliberately. It will only happen in New York if it can be done safely. And if it happens in New York, I think we can have confidence that it will be done under the strictest and most rigorous regulatory regime
and you're okay with
in the
that,
country.
Because some people from the drilling industry have said, if you go too far to the extremes of regulation, we're not even going to bother. Like, why should we come?
Well, there's a balance. There's no question about it. We certainly have seen in many other areas, and I've talked about a few of them on this show, where we have regulated things to the point that you just choose not to do them. So you need to, as with all these things, have a balance of doing it safely, doing it responsibly, but letting it go forward. But the impacts are huge. And, really, you'd be hard-pressed to find something else that offers the kind of potential for the economy, particularly upstate, that this does. There's just nothing else out there.
It's a short-term thing. I mean, to a certain degree, and we can quibble over how much gas there is, and it's been revised, the estimate of what's actually there, and then we can talk about the Utica shale, which is under the Marcellus, all this stuff we can talk about, but eventually there won't be anything left to drill for. So that is a lifespan of whatever it is. And you think even despite the fact that there is a lifespan that has a definitive end, whatever that might be, it's still worth it to do this investment because of the short-term economic gain?
Absolutely. I'm not sure it's that short-term. You know, everything has a lifespan. I mean, every economic activity that you engage in does, every sort of operation like this does. So we shouldn't be deterred by the fact that it's not going to go on forever. They're not going to be drilling for oil in the Middle East forever either, but that's another facet of this here. It's clean energy. It is an important step towards energy independence in New York and in this country, which
well, hold on. It's clean when it burns. I mean, or when it's used. There are some people who would suggest that the potential for air pollution or water pollution or noise pollution from trucks, etc., doesn't make it so clean when it's being extracted necessarily and transported.
Well,
right?
It's an industrial process, but these things happen all over the state, and you do it in a way that is reasonable, that is and that is balanced, and that has input from the community, which is the process that's going on now. But the people I talk to in the southern tier overwhelmingly are in favor of this happening because they're sitting on the sidelines right now. They're looking at what's going on across the border. They're watching people fly into the airports in the southern tier, stay at hotels in the southern tier, eat it. There already is some economic benefit, but we're getting the spillover from Pennsylvania. It's time for New York to get in the game here.
Okay, so tell me then, you have some experience of these kind of building coalitions, the power from numbers, et cetera. I'm thinking, for example, of the State Business Council and then NFIB, et cetera, working together to try and push a political agenda. So in this instance, you have come together with a number of other fellow business
a lot of the same
organizations.
folks that we worked with in the past.
Right, and what will you do? I mean, is it going to be a campaign?
I think it's going to take a number of different forms. Right now, it's really a grassroots effort to connect with folks at the local level.
So you have a website,
where there's a website. Right. We did a media tour today on the phone with reporters from around the state. It's a coalition that's not only business groups, the Business Council, NFIB is involved in it, local chambers, landowner groups, labor groups, unions. It's a very broad-based coalition, which I think speaks volumes to the extent to which this is going to have a big economic impact and create a lot of opportunities around the state. But we're going to try to add balance to the conversation here. It's not just the detractors and the opponents versus the industry. There's a lot of other stakeholders out there that are going to be impacted by this, and we think those voices ought to be heard. So
just before I don't want to get too technical, but is it a C4 that you've created?
It's a C5, I think, but that's not my side of it. I'm
well, I'm just wondering, going forward, that makes you capable of raising money, of spending money, to influence, to run ads, to, I don't know, mail, phone bank, whatever it is that you might do.
I think there will be a lot of efforts like that. I think they'll come from different places. Whether this group is going to do that directly itself hasn't been decided just yet. But our organization is certainly looking at, making sure that we get out there and make sure that we help get this done, because we think it's a huge opportunity, obviously, for our industry, because there's going to be a lot of construction, highway building, environmental. Right. But we also believe that and we've talked on the show before about the state's infrastructure crisis, and the fact that we are, I don't know, only $250 billion, short in terms of being able to deal with it over the next 20 years. This is going to create a lot of revenue for the state, a lot of new revenue, because there's going to be a lot of new economic activity, and we believe that part of that can help solve the infrastructure crisis that the state has.
Will you have a presence at these hearings that are coming up next week?
We are going to submit comments. I don't think I'm going to go to the hearings. We have members that have been participating. We're working on, looking at maybe doing some of the downstate stuff where there may not be as much balance as you would see upstate. But, our goal really here is to keep this focused on facts and science and economics. So, I drove by the refugee camp that's set up in the park across from the Capitol.
They call themselves Occupy Albany.
Okay, well, they're occupying the park, and they're mad at Wall Street.
They're not refugees, they're protesters.
Well, it looks a little like a refugee camp, but they have signs up there saying ban fracking now. If you are concerned about the economy and you're concerned about opportunities, here is a major
Okay, well, then maybe
opportunity.
you should get some tents and set them up and have some signs and then create a counter-protest. Just not on the Lafayette Park side.
Never been a fan of camping. I'll stay home, but I'm happy to go out and talk to folks during reasonable hours about it. Fair
enough. Thank you very much for joining us. If you do that, let us know so we can send a camera, because I think that would be fantastic.
I'll be sure not to. Thanks.
Oh, very good. Okay. Mike Elmendorf, I want to thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
As always, it's been enjoyable.
Thanks a lot.
Okay.